rehearse what I was going to say. I didn't need to. When my mother-in-law showed up at my door 17 years after she threw me out into a January night with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a grief so heavy I could barely breathe, I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just looked at her through the glass panel beside the front door. She hadn't even made it to the porch yet, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. Not the rage I'd carried for years. Not the old ache that used to wake me up at 3 in the morning. Just a clean, quiet nothing, like a room that's been emptied and swept. I let her ring the bell twice before I opened the door. My husband Philip died in March 17 years ago. He was 29. An aneurysm, sudden, no warning, no goodbye. We'd been married 14 months. We were still learning each other. Which drawer he left open by accident, how he liked his coffee on Sundays versus weekdays, the way he hummed under his breath when he was nervous and didn't know it. We were also 3 months pregnant. His parents found out about the baby at the same time they found out about the funeral arrangements. His mother, I'll call her what she told me to call her, which was never Mom, always her first name, Lorraine, didn't cry when the hospital called her. I was in the waiting room. I heard her voice on the other end of the phone when the nurse handed it to me and Lorraine asked, before she asked anything else, whether Philip had updated his will. I was 24 years old. My husband had just died, and his mother's first question was about the will. His father, Frank, was quieter about it. He did his damage slowly. Philip had a trust, not enormous by some standards, but significant, set up by his grandfather, managed through a family attorney in Hartford. The terms were specific. If Philip died without children, the trust transferred in full to his parents. If he had children, it split. Half to Lorraine and Frank, half held in trust for the child until age 25. I didn't know any of this when Philip died. I found out at the reading, 10 days after the funeral, sitting in an attorney's office in a black dress that still smelled like the church. Lorraine looked at me across that conference table the way you look at a problem that needs solving. I was 3 months pregnant. That meant the trust was no longer fully theirs. Within a week, they had a new attorney. Within 2 weeks, I had a letter. The letter said, in the careful language of people who have money and use it as a weapon, that given the contested circumstances of Philip's estate, they were recommending I vacate the home, Philip's home, the one we'd been renting from his parents because the market was brutal and we were saving, while the legal matters were sorted. The letter said this was not an eviction. It said this was a voluntary arrangement in the interest of all parties. I was 12 weeks pregnant, newly widowed, and being asked to leave my home voluntarily. I left. I didn't have the money or the knowledge or the fight in me, not then. I had a garbage bag in my sister's couch in Raleigh and a grief that felt like a physical weight on my sternum. I didn't know yet that the worst part wasn't losing the house. The worst part came 6 weeks later when I lost the baby. A missed miscarriage. That's what the doctor called it. The baby had stopped developing sometime around 11 weeks, but my body hadn't let go. I found out at what was supposed to be my 16-week appointment, in a room with a machine that should have shown me a heartbeat. I drove myself home from that appointment. I don't know how. I remember the light on the highway, how flat and ordinary everything looked, and thinking, nobody out there knows. All these people in their cars going wherever they're going and they don't know. I called my sister from the parking lot of a Walgreens and couldn't speak for a full minute. She drove 4 hours that night to be with me. She slept on the other side of my bed with her hand on my back. I don't remember much else about that week. I never told Lorraine and Frank. The attorney's office sent paperwork I couldn't make myself open. My sister put it in a shoebox under her bed and told me to deal with it when I was ready. It was 3 months before I was ready. By then, the legal situation had changed. Without a child, the trust reverted fully to Philip's parents as written. There was nothing to contest. The attorney my sister helped me find, a kind, precise woman named Ms. Aldrich, who charged me on a sliding scale, confirmed what I already suspected. I had no legal claim to the trust. Philip hadn't had time to update anything. We talked about wills the same way young couples talk about wills. Vaguely, someday, when things slow down. Things never slow down. That's the thing nobody tells you. I signed what needed to be signed. I took what was legally mine, which was modest. And I started over. Starting over at 25 with no husband, no baby, no house, and about $4,000 in savings is not a cinematic experience. There's no training montage. There's just the particular exhaustion of applying for jobs while grief-fogged, of learning to cook for one again, of lying awake calculating whether you can afford both groceries and the copay for the therapist you desperately need. I got a job as an administrative coordinator at a property management company in Raleigh. Not glamorous. Mostly scheduling, filing, answering phones, learning the database system that tracked leases and maintenance requests and tenant histories. But I was good at it. I was good at it because the database didn't lie. Numbers didn't say one thing and mean another. A lease either said what it said or it didn't. I started paying attention to the way properties were valued, how rent was set, how leases were structured. I asked questions. My manager, a methodical man who'd been in real estate for 30 years, noticed that I asked good questions and started answering them properly instead of brushing me off. I took a night class, then another. I got my real estate license at 27, mostly to understand the paperwork better. I wasn't planning to sell houses. I just wanted to understand the language that had been used against me. But then I sold a house, and then another. By 30, I had my broker's license. By 32, I had a small team. By 34, which is where we are now, 17 years after Philip died, 16 and a half years after his mother asked me to leave my home, I run a boutique property management firm with 18 employees and a client list that includes some of the most significant residential portfolios in the Research Triangle. I own the building my office is in. I bought it 3 years ago. I signed the papers on a Tuesday morning and then sat at my new desk for a long time looking out the window at the street below, thinking about the woman who used to count change to see if she could afford both groceries and therapy. I could not have imagined her becoming me. The thing about rebuilding a life from scratch is that you stop waiting to be rescued. That sounds obvious. It doesn't feel obvious when you're in it. When you're in it, there's always some part of you that thinks someone will notice how hard you're trying and show up to help. A check in the mail. A call from someone who owes you an apology. Something. Nobody showed up. I stopped waiting around year 3, roughly, and after that things got much simpler. I made one friend in those early years who turned out to matter more than most, a woman named Cecile, who rented the apartment across the hall from mine in the building where I lived for 6 years. Cecile was a paralegal, fiercely practical, funny in the way that people are funny when they've survived something. She proofread every lease I ever drafted. She was the first person I told when I got my broker's license. She brought me soup when I had a terrible flu in 2014 and left it outside my door with a post-it that said, "Don't be an idiot, eat the soup." Cecile is my emergency contact, not my sister, who I love and who lives in Nashville now with her husband and 2 kids. Cecile, because family is sometimes the person who shows up on the ordinary Tuesday when nothing dramatic is happening, just to eat takeout on your couch and watch bad television, and makes you feel like a real human being again. I never got that from Lorraine and Frank. I never got it from most people who were technically supposed to be family. I heard about Frank's death through a cousin of Philip's, a man named James who'd come to our wedding and occasionally sent a Christmas card. James texted me in the fall of last year, not because we were close, but because he thought I should know. Frank had died of a stroke. Lorraine was now alone in the house in Hartford. I sent a card. It felt like the right thing. Philip would have wanted me to. I didn't expect to hear from Lorraine directly. I hadn't spoken to her in 15 years. Which is why, when my Ring doorbell showed her face on a Thursday afternoon in February, I stood in my kitchen for a long moment and just looked at my phone screen. She was thinner. Her hair had gone white. She was standing at the bottom of my porch steps in a gray wool coat, and she looked, for the first time in my memory, uncertain. I watched her ring the bell. I watched her ring it again. I set down my coffee, walked to the front door, and opened it. She said my name. Just my name, the way people say it when they're hoping the name itself will do some of the heavy lifting. Lorraine, I said. I wasn't sure you'd open the door. I almost didn't. She looked past me into the house. I didn't move to let her in. We stood there for a moment, and I watched her recalibrate. She'd expected something different, I think. Someone different. Someone who'd been waiting 17 years to have this conversation and would collapse into it. I wasn't that person anymore. I need to talk to you, she said. It's about the trust. There it was. I leaned against the door frame and waited. She told me that Frank had made changes to his estate before he died, that there were some questions about Philip's original trust documents, inconsistencies, her attorney had said, that there was a process underway to review the original distribution, but if it turned out the trust had been improperly managed, and she seemed to be choosing her words with enormous care here, there might be funds that were technically still tied to Philip's estate. And Philip's estate, she had been advised, might still have relevance to me as his surviving spouse. She wasn't asking me for money. She was asking me to help her get it. She needed me to sign something, or not sign something, or provide documentation about my marriage that would support her claim against the secondary trustee who had apparently been mishandling the funds for years. I let her finish. Then I said, Lorraine, you asked me to leave my home 10 days after my husband died. She started to say something. You sent me a letter, I said. 14 months of marriage and you sent me a letter. That was Frank's decision. You signed it. She was quiet. I lost the baby, I said. I never told you that. I lost it at 16 weeks. And I know you and Frank believe that baby was the only reason I had any claim on anything. So I want you to understand. I grieved that child. Not because of the trust. Because that was Philip's child. That was the last part of him I had. Her face did something complicated. I'm sorry, she said. It came out small. I didn't know what to do with it. I believe you, I said. And I did actually. Grief does things to people. Losing Philip had done things to me. It had probably done things to her too, even if she'd handled it in the worst possible way. But I can't help you, I said. Whatever is happening with the trust, whatever your attorney needs, I'm not part of that. I signed everything years ago. I moved on. I built something, and I'm not going to go back into that legal process and open everything back up, because it's convenient for you now. She looked at me for a long moment. You've done well, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It almost sounded like genuine acknowledgement. I had to, I said. She nodded once, slowly. I think she understood on some level what she'd set in motion when she sent that letter. I think she'd understood it for a while. I don't hate you, I told her. That was true too. But I don't owe you anything. And I think somewhere you know that. She left without pushing. She walked back to her car, a rental, I noticed. The kind you get at the airport when you fly in for something. And I watched from the doorway until it turned the corner. Then I went inside and called Cecile. Cecile picked up on the second ring, the way she always does. She came, I said. What did she want? Money. Help with the trust, the usual. What did you say? I told her no. I told her the truth. I told her I lost the baby and I never told her. And I told her she'd sent me a letter. Cecile was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? I thought about it. I was standing at my kitchen window looking at the backyard. My backyard, the garden I planted 3 years ago. When I bought this house, the rosemary that came back every spring without any help from me. The chair on the porch where I had coffee on Sunday mornings when the weather was right. Okay, I said. Honestly, okay. Like I didn't know until just now that I'd been carrying something, and now I'm not. Good, Cecile said. That's good. We talked for an hour, about nothing in particular. About the property in Durham I was closing on next week. About the soup she was making for dinner. About a show we'd both been meaning to watch. Ordinary things. the kind of things that make a life. That night I sat on the porch in the cold for a little while, just to be outside. The street was quiet. The neighbor's porch light was on. Somewhere down the block a dog was barking at something, only it could see. Philip would have been 46 this year. I think about that sometimes, who he would have become. Whether he would have been proud of what I built, or whether he'd have teased me about working too much, which was probably true. He had a way of seeing through the thing I was using to protect myself. I loved that about him. I don't know what Lorraine does with the rest of her grief. That's her work to do, not mine. What I know is this: the version of me who left that house in January with a garbage bag, she deserved better. She deserved someone to fight for her. Since no one did, she learned to fight for herself. And the life she built out of that fight is mine, fully mine, and no letter and no trust document and no woman standing at my door in a gray wool coat can reach any part of it. The door closes. The rosemary comes back in the spring. That's enough. That's more than enough. I keep thinking about that January night, the garbage bag, the cold, the way I carried grief and a baby I didn't know I was already losing. I didn't understand then that what Lorraine and Frank set in motion wasn't just cruelty. It was a kind of reckoning they wrote for themselves without realizing it. Every action lands somewhere. The letter they sent 10 days after Philip died, the house they took back, the legal process they moved so efficiently while I was still in shock, none of that disappeared. It just traveled forward in time and arrived back at their door in the form of a woman they no longer recognized and could no longer use. I don't think that's punishment in any cosmic sense. I think it's just the plain arithmetic of how choices work. They chose to see me as an obstacle to money. I chose, eventually, to see myself as someone worth building a life around. Those two choices compounded over 17 years and produced entirely different results. What I had to learn, and it took longer than I want to admit, was that intelligence isn't just about being smart in the way people tell you you're smart. It's about learning to read the world accurately. Understanding a lease. Understanding what a trust document actually says versus what someone tells you it says. Understanding that when a person's first question after their son's death is about a will, they are telling you exactly who they are. I wasn't stupid when I left that house. I was young and grief-fogged, and nobody had ever taught me to read the language of money and power. So I taught myself. That's not a brag. That's just what survival looks like when nobody shows up to help you. The integrity part was harder, honestly. Harder than the licenses. Harder than the nights studying after a full day of work. Because there were moments, more than I'll say here, when I could have done things the way they were done to me. Cut corners. Used information as leverage. Let bitterness make the decisions. I didn't, mostly because I watched what that looked like from the inside and I didn't want to become it. Lorraine and Frank spent 17 years as people who had money and no peace. I spent 17 years building something I could actually stand in without flinching. And the will to keep going. That's the thing nobody gives you and nobody can take away. My sister drove 4 hours the night I lost the baby. Cecile left soup outside my door with a post-it. Small things. But I had to choose over and over to get up and keep going anyway. Not because it felt possible. Sometimes it didn't feel possible. But because the alternative was letting them be right about me, and I wasn't willing to do that. When Lorraine stood at my door in February, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something quieter than that. I felt like a woman who had finished a very long walk and could finally sit down. The door closed. The rosemary in my garden will come back in April without any help from me. I planted it 3 years ago in the yard of a house I bought with money I earned in a city I chose, in a life that is entirely uncomplicatedly mine. That's what I want people to hear in this story. Not that hard work guarantees revenge, but that the life you build when no one is watching. When you're counting change in a Walgreens parking lot, when you're taking the night class after the long shift, that life is real. It's yours in a way that nothing handed to you ever fully is. And when someone shows up 17 years later trying to reach back into it, they find that there's nothing there for them to take. There never was.